All right, we are ready to roll with Vayikra. So we start a whole new book of the Torah, and this book is going to I want to say present some challenges in a number of different areas. One of which is that the book of Shemot was both Bereshit and Shemot were very narrative heavy. There's a lot of story in both Bereshit and Shemot, right? So even the parts of Shemot which are very legal, after the Ten Commandments, Book of Mishpatim, we still even have interspersed a few stories about the Chet HaEgel, the sin of the golden calf, Naseh v'Nishma, the way in which people receive the Torah. So there are a number of different stories that are interlaced there. But the book of Vayikra is going to have a paucity of stories. Maybe at the end, we will get a few. We'll get references to some. Actually, in 3 weeks, we'll get one very dramatic event. But the beginning of Book of Vayikra is very legal, and so it presents a sort of it requires for us to use a different set of narrative muscles, so to speak, or I should say interpretive muscles than we were using before. So, like we have done before with the previous books, I want to explore the Book of Vayikra from the perspective of, okay, well, what does this book mean, and what is its novelty to the world, especially when it splashed upon the scene. And so that's sort of the question that I'm going to come to it with. In order to sort of get into that a little bit deeper, we're using here Egyptian ritual, but we could just as easily have taken perhaps Mesopotamian. We could have taken Canaanite. We could have taken different ritual systems. But since the Jewish people are leaving the Egyptian system, and the Egyptian system was, at least for me, the most easy to access, and makes it, in certain aspects, a very dramatic contrast. So I decided to take Egyptian ritual. This is not, I'm just going to be confessed, this is not an area of expertise for me at all. I am woefully ignorant in this. And there are some here who may have greater Egyptology skills than I do. And if you do, feel free to jump in. But where are we taking our Egyptian question here? So this is a picture from one of the great pyramids I think in Luxor. And the idea is that Egyptian ritual happened in very secret places with a very unique cast of individual. When I went and looked and to see what Egyptologists do think about this, I saw some research that was presented through Cambridge University that talks about this series of offerings, that what would happen. First of all, they claim that the Egyptians did not believe that the idol itself was the deity, but rather it was a gateway, if you will, to access this deity, and they would begin by lighting the fire. Then they would have a censer which presumably was full of incense, and they would proceed into a sacred space. And that sacred space was closed with a certain kind of a tie that was sealed, right? And they would break a clay seal and they would break the cord. And this was to ensure that no one would go in. And then who would go in next? It would be the Kohen, the priests. And there was a whole process of kissing the earth and putting oneself on one's stomach. And this was for the cult of Amun. Amun, I assume, is Amun Ra, which is the sun god. And there are various very elaborate ritual for entering the temple and for going into these secret and closed places, and no one else is going to see this this ritual. Now, what do they do in that area? They would put a robe on the deity. There was also similar things in. I should say this is for the particular ritual that I found, that was deciphered off of a set of hieroglyphics that were found, that are currently, it's on a papyrus that's currently in the Berlin Egypt Museum. but I actually tried to find the actual papyrus and see if there was some actual scroll that we could see. I was unable to access it electronically, regrettably, but this is also not my area, so the hieroglyphics are just that to me. They're nice, cute pictures, so I don't know how to interpret them. But what I was able to glean, and this idea, by the way, in general comes from a Rabbi Dr. Yonatan Grossman, who does have a PhD in Bible and Bible studies, and presumably does know some of the other religions of the ancient East. And this is very much his interpretation. And the reason he gives us this interpretation is because of what follows in Vayikra 1. Now, here, let me pull up my annotator because it's going to be important. I have the English here for you, but we're going to be working mostly in the Hebrew. And it says, Vayikra el Moshe vayedaber Hashem elav me'ohel moed lemor. So Moses is called to, God calls out to Moses from the tent of meeting. Daber al bnei Israel va'amarta alehem, Adam ki yakriv mikem karbano. So Adam is not Kohen, right? So the offering to the God does not belong to the Kohen, right? It is very specifically says to you, Adam, a person. So it says, Min habeima, min habakar, min hatzon, takrivu et karbanchem. So from the animals, from cattle, from sheep, you shall bring your karbanchem. Im olah karbano. So we will get to. We'll also press down a little bit on this term olah, but he says im olah karbano. If it is a complete offering, so mina bakar zachar tamim yakrivenu al petach omed yakriv oto l'rtzono livnei Hashem. So this tells us that if it's an olah, you bring it to the opening of the Ohel Moed, of this tent of meeting. That would be in the northern area, at Lifnei Hashem, before God. And now here's another important point. V'samach yado al rosh olah. This is not referring to the Kohen. This is referring to the owner of the karban. This is everyone, right? This is not something which is exclusive to a priest, but rather this is a possibility that is going to be accessible to absolutely all of the Jews. And it shall be it shall be pleasing for him to atone for it. So again, this is for the individual, for some type of atonement, kapara, some kind of cleansing, right? And just hearkening back to a point we made several weeks ago, that the Mishkan, right? The idea that Aaron, was so tainted by the scandal of the golden calf, is allowed to participate as the head of this institution, is perhaps because the role of the institution is kapara, is cleansing. And what better way to announce that than to say, oh, the guy who is most closely associated with the golden calf, he too is part of this adventure of return. V'shachat et ben bakar lifnei Hashem, and he shall slaughter this animal before Hashem. Now, we are still talking about Jews. Kohen has not been mentioned. Now it says, V'yikrivu b'nei Aaron ha'kohanim et adam v'zarku et adam al mizbeach. So here I'm going to just change my colors because this is good. We'll do Kohanim in purple, right? That's a Kohen color. So, and now it tells us, V'yikrivu b'nei Aaron ha'kohanim et adam v'zarku et adam al mizbeach saviv. What Rabbi Dr. Yonatan Grossman is going to tell us is that everything that has to do with approaching the altar, that's a Kohen job. But when it comes to the offering itself, those are jobs which the average Israelite can do. And we'll see some of the future activities, right? For example, right? So it's a job with the altar to set up the wood for the fire. That is a Kohen job because it's an altar job to build the fire there. let's say Masher ala Eish, Asher ala Mizbeach, right? And they shall set upon them the various parts of the inners and the head and the etc. Right? Those parts as they go up onto the Mizbeach, those are things which are laid out by the Kohen. So there's an interesting division here, right? You have the individual who is associated with the slaughter and the various other activities of the Karban, the designation, and then you have Kohanim who have a separate part. Now, this is Rabbi Dr. Grossman is going to make the point that this is in contradistinction to, why can't I do this? This is contradistinction to the whole picture of the Egypt scenario, where the Kohanim go into the secret places, they do the entire ritual themselves. It is all of and by the Kohanim for the deities to control various things, to make sure the sun rises and sets, doesn't get too hot, etc. But in the Jewish case, you have this partnership between the individual and the Kohen. Now, the whole way in which the idea of karbanot, of sacrifices, is situated is quite certainly for the modern reader, this is one of those scratch your head moments. This is one of those, when you get a bar mitzvah in Parshat Vayikra, you say to yourself, oh my gosh, what am I going to do for a bar mitzvah Dvar Torah for Parshat Vayikra? It's such a hard parsha to write a Dvar Torah about. Now, it's not impossible, and there are certainly things you can talk about. There are many, many things, but it's very highly technical, and it's not super easy to access as just sort of an ordinary reader. I would say in many ways you have to be a sophisticated reader, which is interesting because the Jewish tradition says that the first thing that we teach children in elementary school, we start with Sefer Vayikra, because the book of Vayikra is about purity, and the book of and children are also pure. Another perhaps argument for this is that this is a discussion about sort of maybe the basic relationship with Hashem, or modalities of relationship with Hashem. Nevertheless, coming back to my original point, we all have a scratch your head moment when it comes to karbanot. How am I supposed to understand this? Where does this fit into my life? I'm squeamish. You want me to come and bring an animal and slaughter it and put its parts on top of a burning barbecue, and that there's a certain spirituality there. Hopefully we will get to that spirituality, but even Rambam felt this. And so Rambam's explanation in the Guide to the Perplexed, one of the things Rambam does is he tries to explain various mitzvot. He tries to give the reasoning behind them. Some would say that he perplexes more than he guides, because we're going to get an answer here, and the answer that we're going to get is not something which is going to make us feel, or is not necessarily going to help us warm up to karbanot. It may explain what their role is, but it may not help you develop a future passion to return to such things. So, let's read Rambam. Okay. Yes, Mordechai.
Good evening, Rabbi.
Good evening.
May I ask, are you making a comparison between Torah and Egyptology, or that
Okay, hold that thought. Let's read Rambam first, and then you can ask if it's me or Rambam doing that.
derived from certain things derived from
Again,
Egypt?
same answer.
Thank you.
We're going to look at Rambam first, and then you can ask your question, okay? Fair
Thank
enough?
you. Yes, thank you.
Okay. For it is impossible to transition suddenly from one opposite to another. So Rambam is, of course, describing that the Jewish people were slaves coming out of Egypt, and he's saying, okay, we cannot simply just take them from one scenario to another scenario. And therefore, man, in his nature, is not capable of abandoning suddenly all to which he was accustomed. Therefore, when God sent Moshe Rabbeinu to make out of us a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, Am Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh, through the knowledge of him, meaning the knowledge of God, may he be exalted. And he explained, saying, To you it was shown that you might know. Know this day and lay it into your heart, so that we should devote ourselves to his worship according to what he said, and to serve him with all your heart. And you shall serve the Lord your God, and him shall you serve. As at that time, the way of life generally accepted and customary in the whole world and the universal service upon which we were brought up consisted in offering various species of living beings in the temples in which images were set up, in worshiping the latter, and in burning incense before them. So what he's saying is, okay, Jews, they lived in a world where there's a certain expectation. The expectation of religious activity, just like they did to all sorts of corporeal gods, is they said, okay, they have incense, they have animal sacrifice. We're going to do all of that too. And rather than take the Jewish people cold turkey from one scenario and project them into a scenario where they were without it, and you'll see Rambam has an interesting comparison here, in which images were set up in worshiping the latter and in burning incense before them, the pious ones and the ascetics being at that time, as we've explained, the people who were devoted to the service of temples, consecrated to the stars. His wisdom, may he be exalted, and his gracious plan, which is manifest in regard to all his creatures, did not require that he give us a law prescribing the rejection, abandonment, and abolition of all these kinds of worship. For one could not then conceive the acceptance of such a law, considering the nature of man, which always likes that to which it is accustomed. So if I let the Jews swim in water for so long, I shouldn't throw them into a desert that has no water. They need some sense of transition. They need to embrace that which at least seems somewhat familiar, somewhat in terms of the way that they were psychologically conditioned. I need to make an important switch, essentially, says God. I need them to move from polytheism from idols to a non-corporeal monotheism. And so I am willing to deal with a little bit of animal sacrifice, even though it is not, at least would seem, says Rambam, an ideal and essential form of service. Meaning, God in his infinite wisdom, if God did not have a world that had various cultic rituals before it, and if the Jewish people were sort of plopped down on earth without any prior culture, there may not have been any sacrifices. But of course, the history is what it is. We can't do a counterfactual. And so Rambam says, for historical reasons, for transition reasons, you need to have sacrifices. At that time, this would have been similar to an appearance of a prophet in these times who, calling upon the people to worship God, would say, God has given you a law forbidding you to pray to him, to fast, to call upon him for help in misfortune. Your worship should consist only in meditation without any deeds at all. So basically, Rambam's saying, like, imagine I told you there was this religion called Judaism, but it's absolutely forbidden to pray to God. No such thing as a fast day. Do not ask God for any intervention. So that's what he says is, if that were said to us in our day, is the equivalent of telling our ancestors they should not have had animal sacrifice. Through this divine ploy, it came about that the memory of idolatry was effaced, and the grandest and true foundation of our belief, namely the existence and oneness of the deity, was firmly established. While at the same time, their souls had no feeling of repugnance and were not repelled because of the abolition of modes of worship to which they were accustomed, and which alone were known at that time. So what Rambam is telling us, this is the comparison. Rambam says the comparison is, look, they were coming out of a world that had these kinds of rituals, and so therefore these rituals are introduced in order to help transition the Jewish people without overtaxing their imagination. Okay, Mordechai, I'm ready for your question.
Oh, Rabbi, I think that Rambam explained already. Thank you.
Okay, all right. I planned it well then.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Okay, so we see though that I mean, this is a fascinating Rambam, and one which frankly is a little bit hard to take. One is tempted to embrace this Rambam and say, you know what? When Mashiach comes, he's not going to reinstitute sacrifices. Although we asked that question before, I did a little bit of research into that. I have not seen anybody who says anything to this effect. I heard one person say, I'm not sure if it's what to make of it. But you could say, look, Hashem has created a situation where we are able to return to the land of Israel, that Torah study flourishes more than anything, and for whatever reasons, whether it's a lack of a red heifer, lack of consensus, who knows what, we have decided not. Could be political considerations. We decided not to rebuild the temple now, or to reinstitute animal sacrifice. I told you also that Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Kalischer tried to institute this in the early days of Zionism. He thought about a religious Zionism that we should reinstitute the sacrifices. So this is something that has not been widely accepted, and maybe there's a reason it hasn't been widely accepted. And so maybe it has something to do with Rambam lurking in the background, although I should say nobody says that openly, that pretty much the rest of the Torah world says, no, sacrifices are an ideal. They were the intended. They are part of God's plan. They're very central to the Torah. Okay, Andy.
Yes, Rabbi, remind me exactly the references in Shemot that suggest that the Egyptians were doing animal sacrifice. I don't remember offhand where there's a reference over it.
So it doesn't refer, I don't think Rambam is referring specifically to animal sacrifice in Egypt. Certainly there's animal sacrifice in the ancient Canaanite world. And I would just add to that Moshe, when he talks to Pharaoh, Moshe he talks about, we're going to go and we're going to bring a sacrifice. And Pharaoh seems to say, oh yeah, sure, okay, that's normal. We know people who do that.
Well,
it says go do it in the backyard, and then he's told that you're not supposed to. They'll stone us.
Yes,
if we do that.
That's why I'm puzzled because it seems to me that perhaps we know that the Egyptians were farmers and the Israelites were herders, so that's why it seems to me the connection between Egyptians sacrificing. I don't see the connection. The fact the Israelites want to sacrifice. They would have come before they even came to Egypt, but they were in Egypt for 200-300 years, and yet they remember the sacrifices.
Okay, fair enough. But don't forget that Egypt is only the most immediate context. There's Mesopotamia. Abram came out of Mesopotamia. There's certainly other scenarios where we would have seen sacrifice.
Yeah. From before, absolutely from before. But after 300 years in Egypt, I thought they would have forgotten whatever they learned in Mesopotamia. However, maybe they still remember it. Thank you.
I mean, look, I don't disagree that we don't. I mean, the Bible only tells you what it needs to, right? So, here, let's ask the question to. Hold on.
In fact, idolizing the Egel Za'av maybe indicates that maybe they thought those animals were holy rather than sacrificing them. Maybe.
All right, hold on. Give me one second.
I was quickly Shemot and I couldn't find anything quickly. So.
I'm asking Google, was there animal sacrifice
in ancient Egypt? Yeah.
Okay, this is what AI says. So the intelligence here is only yeah, some of the earliest archaeological evidence of animal sacrifice comes from Egypt. But it was not a central practice of the Egyptian religion. It's peripheral occurrence. So, okay, fair enough. But I don't know whether that undermines Maimonides' point.
No, just the connection, that's all. The Jews needed to transition in order to transition into a world without sacrifices. So it sounded to me like it would have been normal not to have sacrifices, then they don't need transition. But if AI says so, well, who am I going to argue with AI?
Well, it's from Wikipedia, so.
Oh, Wikipedia. Well, it's also an authority of sorts.
Look, we could chase this down further, but Tov, let's getting back to just a couple of things. So I want to just lay out what is in the beginning of Parshat Vayikra. So it lays out certain parts of the sacrifice. It lays out Olah. It lays out.
What?
It lays out Olah. It lays out the Chatat, certain different special offerings of the Kohen Gadol if he makes a mistake. There's also the Karban Shlamim. So just laying out some sacrifices in big ideas. I'm going to leave the Olah on the side because we're going to talk about the Olah in a minute. The Shlamim sacrifice is a Thanksgiving sacrifice, and it comes with lots of meat and has to be eaten immediately. So it's about sharing things with people. The Chatat and the Asham are two different kinds of sin offerings. The Chatat is the lesser of the two. Lesser infractions are governed by the Chatat, the sin offering, and the Asham is more serious infractions. And so the Asham comes from, according to Ramban, the language for Asham is from the word shmama, which means to be utterly destroyed. We're going to just keep that in the back of our heads as we get to the Karban Olah. So before I jump in there, anybody know the first three instances of the Olah in the Torah? Anybody want to venture a guess where those come from?
Was the first one by Isaac?
Akedat
That's
Yitzchak.
actually the second one.
Hmm.
Yitzchak is the second one.
And in Hevel.
Kain
Not
and Evel.
No, not Cain and Abel. It has to use the word Olah.
או דווקא עולם. ועלהו לעולם.
It wasn't Abraham, was it?
Abraham and Isaac is the second.
Oh, okay.
Rabbi, was it Noah after the flood?
Say again?
Noah after the flood?
Correct. Noah after the flood is the first.
יפה, יפה מאוד.
Okay, so you got Noah, you have Abraham, and that doesn't appear again until the Mishkan. It doesn't appear again until after the golden calf. So here, this is sort of an interesting piece of business. These are two instances of the Olah. Vayiven Noach mizbeach laHashem. Noach built an altar to God. Vayikach mikol habeimah haTorah mikol ha'of haTahor. He took from all of the pure animals and all of the pure birds. Ve'al olot b'mizbeach, and he brought olot on the mizbeach. So I found this from Rabbi Yoel bin Nun. Rabbi Yoel bin Nun says that his whole drasha though is about Avraham, but I think that Noach fits in. And his point is that an Olah is in a scenario where you are nearly going to be eliminated. It is a moment of imagined elimination. So certainly the ark is a moment where you think, the whole world is destroyed. And you are obviously very aware of the fact that but for this ark, you too could suffer the same fate. And in the case of Avraham, it says, "Vayomer kachna et binchat yichidcha asher ahavta." Take your son, your firstborn, and your only one, the one that you love, et Yitzchak v'lech lecha el eretz Moriah. Go to the land of Moriah, v'halehu sham la'olah, and raise him up there as an olah. So here, it's your whole future is being threatened. Yitzchak's life is on the line, and it's Hashem yireh lo haseh. God will provide him for himself an animal. And I didn't have enough room on the slide to put the ram in the picture, but we all know that Avram substitutes the lamb for Yitzchak, and so that, says Rabbi Yoel bin Nun, characterizes the idea of the Olah. The idea of the Olah, the religious moment of the Olah, is I don't deserve to live. There's a part of me which is just undeserving. I deserve to be completely consumed. And here, what happens is, instead of me being completely consumed, I am giving a surrogate. This animal is my surrogate. It is in my place. We are, as it were, maybe imagining our own destruction. We imagine our own vulnerability. You come into the temple recognizing that there is a blood debt to be paid of a sort, and you are grateful that it is not you yourself who has to pay it. And that is sort of the essence of what the Olah is. And that it could be that Abraham's job was to ensure that the personal Olah, the personal sacrifice, the personal destruction no longer happened, but rather it was rechanneled into an animal. Okay, Mordechai, you have your hand up.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, a characteristic of the Yehudi and going back to Noach, tzedek in his time, this search for teshuva kind of thing. I'm just wondering if the Egyptians had that type of character, or they were more on a ego level.
Okay, so let me see if I understand this question. So the idea of the Akedah was a certain kind of humility that I don't know. I just trust in God. And your question is, did the Egyptians embody the opposite? I think, we certainly can say Pharaoh embodied the opposite. I don't know if you can stretch it quite as far as all other Egyptians, but certainly you can see Pharaoh. Pharaoh's one says, "Who's this God? I don't know who he is." Right? So there are, I guess that I think there's room for that sort of contrast in this conversation for sure. What I do think that this adds to the picture is that, again, you need to be personally invested, right? That the idea of having people to end where a little bit we started, that it's not all Kohanim, that the individual brings his animal and he puts his hands on it and he does the slaughter, and he's involved in many different things. By the way, he doesn't have to do the slaughter, but that's at least how it's described in these first chapters of Vayikra. But that again speaks to this, I think, the same idea as this Olah, this complete offering, is that I'm here to lay myself down, so to speak, to complete surrender to Hashem. Annie, I see you have your hand up. I don't know if that's old or new.
No, it's a short new one. Could there be any possible connection between Olah and the verb la'alot?
Of course. It ascends all to God.
So Olah then is raising or elevating then.
Right, correct.
Okay. Makes sense.
But one certainly simple meaning of it is that no part of the Olah is eaten or consumed by the owners or the Kohanim. And so it all goes up, nothing stays down.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
As opposed to a Shlamim, which is shared with everyone, a Chatat the Kohanim eat.